right. Well, welcome to everybody. We appreciate you being here today. This is the third lesson in what is known this time of year in many other Christian circles as Advent. That comes from the Latin word adventus, which means to an event or a person shows up. It translates a Greek word, epiphania. We get our English word epiphany from it, and it just means to arrive. And what it's talking about is the arrival of God's answer for the solution to the sin problem. Satan had done such a good job, though, for thousands of years that not many people recognized it. And in fact, the early Christians really had no information about it until two of the gospel writers eventually got some information from the eyewitnesses, probably Mary at the time. She might have been the only one, really, who had that information, and then they recorded it for us. Matthew and Luke are the only two places where we get this information. Yet the rest of the world at this time of year is focused on that. Now, things have crept in recent years, since the first century, things that really didn't happen, things that are not in place. For one thing, we'll get there in a little bit, it was most likely in the springtime of the year or the early summer, not in what we call December. There are many clues to let us know that, but after Christianity was legalized, this was a festival that their pagan groups used to worship as the time of lights, because this is the winter solstice. Days are starting to get longer now. And so that this was the time they celebrated the gift of the son of their main god, who was the god of the sun. So you can see how they would just, Christianity, why reinvent the wheel? This is what people are thinking of this time of year. Let's use it and bring them along to the real answer, because this is a very important doctrine in Christianity. The Hebrew writer tells us that the blood of bulls and goats do not take away sin. So God prepared a body, a human, came himself. The Apostle John says, if anyone does not hold the fact, the doctrine that Jesus was God in the flesh, let him be forever cursed. And he also calls them anti-Christ, because you're against the main element that God came here and lived as one of us to show us what he expects us to live by. He did it perfectly, the only one who did, so that he could be the only substitute. Only needed one. Because he's an eternal being, he has an eternal number of lives to give. If he were just a true human like you and me, he'd have one life to give. And sorry, I'm going to be nasty. I'm pushing you out of the way so I can get it. But I don't have to. He was an infinite being with an infinite number of lives. So the virgin birth is a very important doctrine in Christianity. And it bothers me that many circles will not talk about it this time of year because of it having pagan influences. Let's wash those out of there and let's talk about the important thing. Paul will say in 1 Corinthians 15, the gospel is the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus, his sacrifice for sin. But if this doctrine hadn't been in place for them to understand, that still would not have made any sense. So, it's necessary. It can be taught any time of year. And I don't want Satan turning me off from people thinking about it at this time of year and then taking them on to what the true gospel then, what Jesus came to do. So, we talked about the preparation during the time of Advent, the hope through the prophets. All the prophecies God put in place for thousands of years. That's the Epiphany, Advent, A. And then during the time between the Testaments, the time from Malachi until John the Baptist was born, God was still very busy. And last week I showed you in section B how it was the perfect time for Jesus to come and have his message spread throughout the whole known world within one generation. Perfect timing. All the things that were in place. So today, actually taking a look at his actual arrival, the Advent. Now, a lot of people will interpret the prophecies for the next coming. But people really didn't understand there was going to be a next one until after Jesus rose into heaven and the angel announced it to the disciples. Now that's the first time we hear of a second coming. So why would there be prophecies for a second coming before there's even been a first one? So let's hold on to the first one. Jesus came here to get us ready for when he comes back. He's really not left us, though, has he? He was never away from us, was he? He's the one who was, who is, and who will be. The eternal one. The name Yahweh in Hebrew, Yahweh, we pronounce it today, literally is the Hebrew for the past, the present, and the future tenses for existing.
And this time, or the next time, whatever you want to call it, we don't have to wait for him to grow up.
Now, the first coming, the Advent that we celebrate this time of year, and it's a good time to celebrate it every day, yes, but it's good to be reminded and take advantage of the other people thinking about it this time of year. This was the one to help us get ready and to prepare future generations to be ready, because the next time he comes, no one's going to miss it. Everyone will notice. And so Paul says in his letters, there is no excuse for us not to be ready. So let's get ready. Let's stay ready. Let's be working and be busy when he comes again. Not quitting your jobs and going off somewhere on a mountaintop waiting for him to come back so you can escort him here. He does not need an escort. And we'll get here in a few minutes too. He did not come to establish a kingdom here. His kingdom is in a new creation. New, not from time, but from our use. New to us, like when I bought my car. It was 3 years old, but to me it was new. Here's my new car. 3 years old, but it was new to me. That's the new heavens and the new earth. That's the new Jerusalem. And Paul says we get a new body fit for that life. We'll be changed fast as you can wink your eye. We'll get a new one. It's going to be stronger because it's not going to be weakened by sin. It's going to be smarter because we actually understand what God is doing since he revealed it all to us. It's going to be free from the distortions of Satan. It's going to be a much better one. And it's going to be fit for the new creation. This body was made from this creation and it goes back to this creation. We get a new one. What's it going to be like? Paul said, don't know, but it's going to be a lot better. So that's our hope, our future hope that we keep alive. All right, the early years of Jesus then, and I just call it the early years because we don't have a whole lot of information about it. What most of the information we have about Jesus when he begins his ministry. That's what Mark and, not really John, but yeah, John's gospel picks it up when Jesus begins his ministry at the age of 30. So what was happening for the first 30 years? We have very scant information. People have tried to figure it out, and I don't see anything wrong with that. But people have believed that it was inspired, and they come up with a lot of weird ideas to answer those questions. We think the Bible needs to answer every question we have. That's where we get our distortions from.
We should give a lot of credit to Joseph and Mary.
Oh my goodness, yes. Yes, yes, yes. And that will come up. Those two were specially chosen for their faith, that God knew, they would be willing to do that. But the information we have only comes from 2 of the Gospels. On the back is just from class I taught on the life of Christ, and I did a very difficult thing. But I was actually, I don't know, I guess it was more for me when I taught it. I did what was called a harmony of the Gospels. Because each of the 4 Gospels tell the story of Jesus but from a different viewpoint. And so you try to put it together. The American mind thinks in time increments, chronologically. This happened, then this, then this, then this. The people who compiled the scriptures and wrote them and put them together didn't think that way. In the Middle East, they still don't. They will talk in themes, topics. And so they will tell a story, and then they'll tell the story the same way, but things that happened before that. And our book of Revelation is so distorted today because they're trying to put it in chronological order. This will happen, then this, then this, then... No. He's telling the same story 3 different ways. Same story. So that you don't get just a pencil sketch. You get a panoramic painting of the life of Christ. So no matter which walk of life you come from, you find something that appeals to you. And something that comes from Jesus. The Gospels are called synoptics. S-Y-N in the Greek language literally means, if I can say it, literally means to mesh together. So when we talk about syncing our Bluetooth devices, we're putting them together. They're joining them. Optic was their word for the eyes actually perceiving something, not the mind. So it literally means to put these 4 that we have for us today side by side and make their comparison. See the story together. Not as separate stories, but as one. That's why there has been what is called a harmony of the Gospels, putting them together. This mainly refers to Matthew, Mark, and Luke because their material is so similar. John is a different bird. And yet, he paints some nuances in the story of Jesus that really makes him come alive and makes what the others record make sense. The word gospel itself comes from the Greek word that means good news, a good story, a good communication, happy tidings. It comes from the Old English good, where that's only referred to for God. That's why when the guy comes to Jesus and says, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus will stop him and say, why'd you call me good? Had you come to the conclusion by your faith that I am actually God? Because that's the word for God. But he noticed in his questioning and everything else, okay, the guy's not there. Not there yet. He's on his way. Jesus did not tell people who he was. He allowed them to come to that by faith. That's why he blessed Peter when Peter acknowledged him as the Christ, the Son of the living God. Oh, yes, Peter, I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. Yeah, you didn't come to that by humans telling you. You came to that by faith. That's what Jesus is looking for. So, good. You just drop an O. In English, we always love to abbreviate stuff, don't we? And that's where we get the word God from. Is actually the original word is good. A good spell. A good language. A good communication. The Greek, euangelion. And the U is sometimes pronounced like a V. Does that sound familiar to you? Evangelion? How about evangelism? That's where the English word evangelism comes from, is the Greek word euangelion. 4 different views. And they're not detailed biographies. They're not telling us everything that happened. John himself will say, if everything was written that Jesus did and said, the world couldn't hold all the books that would be written. These I wrote to you so that you would faith that Jesus was God in the flesh and he came to die in your place. All right. So, Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector and a disciple. And the reason why they're listed in the order they're listed, it has no rhyme or reason in our minds. Matthew was not the first one written. First one to have written a gospel that the churches could use was actually Mark. And it's the shortest one. Matthew, though, was a tax collector, so he was probably a Herodian politically. He appreciated the Roman occupation, and once you know what the influence was for the Romans, you would appreciate the Roman occupation. They brought a lot to influence the spread of Christianity, and in fact then adopted it and took it with them to the farthest reaches of their empire. Even though it was distorted, at least the beginning part of the message was there. He wrote to a Jewish audience. His favorite saying, and for his purpose for including what he wrote, was to show how Jesus fulfilled what was spoken by the prophets. And only the Jews would have that information or would care. His purpose was to show that Jesus was Messiah. So if it didn't have that purpose of fulfilling the prophets, he probably didn't record it for that reason. Mark was a later disciple. His mother hosted the church in her home. And he later went around with Paul. Got freaked out by some of the miracles that were performed and probably discouraged because of the persecution, and went back home. But wanted to have a second chance. Paul wouldn't let him, would he? What a tough guy to work with. If it weren't for Barnabas saying, come on, Mark, we'll go this way. Later on in Paul's letter, he had egg on his face. He was eating crow. He said, yeah, you know what? Bring my scrolls, bring my cloak for winter, and don't forget to bring Mark. He's been especially important to me. Yeah, Mark was a later disciple. He wrote, because of his background, to people of the Roman influence. And his favorite word. The Romans were not interested in details. They just wanted to know what happened. Just give me the facts, okay? And so Mark's favorite word in the original language is a word translated immediately. Immediately after this, Jesus went out on the mountainside, taught people. And immediately after that, he went over here. And then he went, okay. Mark can tell in just a short period of time what it takes the other three to write a novel about. And he can put it into words. It's like talked to my son, or we texted him, actually, when we went on vacation one time. He was taking care of the house and the dogs. He told us everything that had happened in the neighborhood, everything that was taking place with the dogs and the cats. He told us, and after we finished, I looked at my screen, and it only lasted 45 seconds. That's my son for you. That was Mark and the Roman mindset. He was most interested in what Jesus did. Jesus proved through his actions. Not in the Roman mind, they could care less about his teachings. They'd think about those later. Jesus proved he was Messiah. Luke was a later disciple. He had a high level of education. He was a medical professional. And he was Gentile. So he wrote a very detailed account. A 2-volume account. What's the other one? Book of Acts. Yeah. And it was named later. It was the Acts of the Apostles. Long title. So someone said, actually, it wasn't everything they did. So it was some of the Acts of some of the Apostles. You see how humans do? Try to improve things. And now it's shortened just to Acts. Yeah.
Didn't he kind of humanize Christ more than anything?
Yeah, he did. Because he wanted to show his purpose was to give them the details to prove that Jesus' salvation is for everybody. And you'll see that just in his genealogy of Jesus. Yeah. John is different. He calls himself the disciple that Jesus loved. Really, Jesus only loved one.
He loves
It's like when we would get together for the Allen family party. My cousin David, he said he was Grandma's favorite. And I knew, she told me I was. And so we're older now and we're having fun with it. Cousin Jill joins in. No, she told me I was. And okay. That's how John felt. Because of his relationship with Jesus, he saw what true love, agape love, really was. And so he was the disciple. He saw himself from what Jesus' mission really was. How much God cares for humans. So that like David would write in the Psalms, what is man that you're even mindful of him? John witnessed that firsthand. John wrote from the standpoint of an intimate friend. He gives us details of the times that Jesus spent with his disciples, personal time that the others do not even include. And his purpose was to show how Jesus was God in the flesh. So that in his letters he will say, if someone comes to you and does not carry this doctrine, let him be forever cursed. He calls them anti-Christ. And he said they came from our fellowship. There's lots of them. It's not just one person at the end of time. There's a distortion that Satan has put in place. Any person or group of people that do not promote the true Christ are anti-Christ. He wrote so that we would believe, so that we would faith that Jesus was. And in the textbook I was using for the class, it shows the emblems that have come down through the years for each of the Gospels to show how different they were and what their purpose was. With 4 Gospels, then, we have a panoramic view of the greatest life that ever existed. There were other Gospels written, but they had not been included because they did not show Jesus in the correct way. Thomas, Barnabas, especially Judas. Isn't it funny Judas wrote a Gospel after he died? But it's written from the viewpoint of one of the disciples who actually knew what Jesus was doing. All the others didn't get it. So Jesus asked him then to force the Romans to do stuff because there is a modern philosophy, and it bothers me greatly, that Jesus' first coming failed. So that the church age is actually plan B. The backup plan. So that we could get people truly prepared so when he comes back again, then he can establish his kingdom here on earth. And he'll have a fighting force against Satan. That's a view that Satan and God are opposite yet equal in power. Jesus underestimated Satan's power. Jesus was not a good speaker or not a good motivator. He chose the wrong friends as allies, and it all unraveled, and he got himself killed. And so God raised him from the dead, and they're just reorganizing. They huddled up again, and he'll come back again and do it the next time.
Do it right.
Yeah. That comes from these 3 Gnostic Gospels. Gnostic means it's all in the knowledge, and it's in your head. It's not a physical thing. You got to think right. Those actually came into existence 2nd, 3rd century because the true message of God, Christ, what Jesus did, it wasn't exciting enough. That's why they were set aside. All right, back over on the other side then. We'll take a look. And you can read this for yourself. I know it's busy. There's a lot of information there. But this doctrine of the virgin birth is so important that you have to have this basis. Otherwise, Jesus was not like one of us. Yet it is said he was tempted in every way we are, yet no sin. And I've asked my classes before what some ways he was tempted in. He had to experience life as a true human. And it will really bother you to think about it. It will. Even in grad school, we had some of my fellow classmates could not handle Jesus being human. Did he cry in the manger? Well, the songs that we sing say, "Oh, he was such a perfect baby, he never cried." Well, they're not crying because of sin or because they do something bad. Jesus grew up learning carpentry, which was actually construction and not making furniture, from his father. You think he ever hit his thumb with the hammer? Oh no, we can never have him making a mistake. That's not a sin. That's how you learn.
You know, we kind of look at anger as a sin.
Yeah.
And he went into the temple and looked over the money changer's table.
One guy told me also, people will interpret that he badmouthed his mother in the first miracle. "Woman, it's not time yet." And one guy told me, he was a young kid, he was learning, I was mentoring. It was a good experience. But if Jesus ever sinned, that was it. If Jesus ever sinned, it's all over. So, unless you want everyone to be back in sin and we're looking for another Messiah, you have to rethink that one.
I'd say his mother kind of pushed him into that, didn't she?
She did. And anytime he performed a miracle, there was a definite purpose for it. He didn't just go around pointing and like Merlin the magician, poof and poof and poof. No, they only did miracles when it was necessary to establish faith, to prove who he was.
You know, it's kind of like when he went and raised Lazarus from the dead, and he told them to move the stone.
Yeah.
He could have moved it.
Sure. Yeah. Move the stone. And then he yelled for Lazarus to come out. He was standing right there. What you yelling for? Come on. Use your inside voice. Why'd he yell? For everybody else watching. And then he had him unwrap the guy. Can you see him bouncing all wrapped up like a mummy? Yeah. And that was all to prove that body was dead in there. It's alive now. And the Jews, they knew right then, we gotta get rid of this guy. Because that was the ultimate nail in their coffin. Raising the dead. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. With the birth of Jesus then, it actually begins Luke chapter 1 with the birth of John the Baptist. Coming to an elderly couple that were beyond their years of conceiving and barren. So Elizabeth would have been looked down upon in town. Zechariah was a priest. So we actually have him being born to a priestly family. And they were only allowed to marry Levite women. Keep that in mind for a second. Zechariah thought that was a pretty good idea. Gabriel came and said, your prayer's been answered. What prayer is that? Yeah. Well, is that good news? You're 80 years old now, beyond the age of childbearing. Now you're going to have a kid? Grandkids are great. Give them back to mom and dad when they act up, right? And he wouldn't believe it. So he was struck with a speech impediment, which would have disqualified him from priestly duty. And it may have been, at that time of year, so many descendants of Aaron, might have been a once-in-a-lifetime experience when he finally drew the short straw, and now he's disqualified. Yeah. Elizabeth, however, she was elated. She thought that was the most wonderful thing. And there are stories that have been written about that. Who does that remind you of? Old folks, too old to bear children? And Abraham and Sarah. Yeah, you see that coming out in their song of joy. How God's doing it again. First time in 400 years anything like this has ever been known. So people say, we better watch this kid. Yeah. Then it's told by Gabriel to Mary. Matthew says it was to fulfill the prophecy in Isaiah that his name would be Emmanuel. Yet what name does he give him? those two names together, you probably just get the E, right? How does that? Emmanuel means God with us. And who was Jesus?
God's son.
God with us. In our presence. The actual name Yeshua, we spell it Joshua. It's the Greek transliteration, and then the Latin of it comes out as Jesus. Literally means God saves. And what did Jesus do when he came here? What was his purpose? Okay, Emmanuel was who he was. Yeshua is what he came to do. So the two do work together. That's from Isaiah chapter 9. Latin word incarnare. The incarnation means a deity in human form. That's the doctrine of incarnation. Mary then runs off to see Elizabeth, who is 6 months pregnant. Don't think for a moment she traveled all by herself. That would be very dangerous. Probably the whole family went. She stayed 3 months. Okay, she's Elizabeth's, and they're relatives. It does not say how they were related. But if Elizabeth married a priest, she had to be from the tribe of Levi. And if Luke's genealogy is Mary's, which I tend to believe, she's descended from Judah. David. So whether you trace Jesus' lineage through Joseph or Mary, you both get back to David. Yeah. So how they were related, we don't know. It's come down. See, people like to fill in the blank there, don't they? Oh, they were cousins. No. Elizabeth was beyond years to conceive, and Mary is probably right at the point of puberty. Maybe an aunt?
Does it really matter?
No. No. But Luke puts that in there. Stayed 3 months. I made the big mistake of saying she stayed until the birth of John. I have people that think it's their job to straighten me out. Bible doesn't say that. It doesn't say she stayed till the birth. Well, what? Did she have to leave? She had to go back to work? She's not a PTO? Why would she go that far, stay for 3 months, and then, gotta go? You're going to stay for the grand event, aren't they? Who else would be around then to give Luke the information of what really took place at that birth? There was only one person he knew in the Christian circle who could give that information. All right. John's birth, Zechariah begins to sing a song. No one ever knew him to be a poet before. So he starts singing, and everybody's impressed. So on the back, I give you the lessons that we learn at Jesus' birth. Zechariah's song literally means God can do impossible things, but remember, on his timing, not ours. Elizabeth, the wait was worth it. All right, then we have the Gabriel to Mary. She believed it. She was not questioning out of sarcasm like Zechariah was. I've never been with a man. Okay. Well, the Holy Spirit will come upon you. Oh, yeah, okay, that happens a lot, doesn't it? That shows you her faith. Now, Mary, she chose to face the ridicule in order to be God's servant. I think Patsy brought that up earlier. And Joseph. Oh, boy. When Mary returns from the grand event, she's smuggling a basketball, isn't she? He knows that's not his kid. Shows you his character. He was going to just do it quietly. If she loves this guy better, fine. I'll step back. There is a depiction, a video depiction. I forget the name of the movie now, but it has Joseph actually going to the rabbi. What are my options here? Small town Nazareth, everybody knows everybody's business. Everybody knows. Joseph was here. She was there. She comes back 3 months pregnant. The rabbi goes down through the list. The next scene has Joseph and Mary standing there like lovebirds. And if you've ever done a wedding, you look at them, you don't know what's coming. They're standing there. Oh, they're so happy. And the rabbi's sitting there looking at them like, you know what? He was visited by an angel, said, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife. Why would he be afraid? What's he going to have to live with?
Somebody else's child.
Now, what's conceived in her is the Holy Spirit. Oh, yeah, okay, good. Happens all the time. Shows you his faith. The story, the lesson we learned from Joseph, he chose to honor his love and his commitment, not just to Mary. But he got that in a dream at night. Not an angel visit. And yet he believed it. And he was very faithful. All right. Joseph and Mary went to Bethlehem to be counted. The Romans would not have given it this time of year to force everyone to their hometown to register. They want as many people to register as possible because it was done for tax purposes. The more people, the more revenue. They would do it in the spring or the summertime of the year. That was what the historians actually show. Anytime they had a census taken for tax revenue, it was in the late spring and early summer when travel would be efficient. The Romans would be guarding the roads, and the people would be traveling in packs, groups. So it's not just Mary and Joseph with Mary on the back of a donkey. She might have been in a cart. They were around at that time. Don't know. But whole families would go to the ancestral home to register. So when they got to Bethlehem, place is crowded. No more room. And Jesus was born in a barn. So if left the door open and his mother said, "What, were you born in a barn?" She could say, "Yeah, Mom." I'm joking. The only place for them to stay. And why was that the only place for them to stay? Is because the regular occupants are out in the field. And you don't do that in wintertime either. This time of year is dry. It's cold at night. It's deadly for the sheep. It was warm enough for them to be out in the fields with the sheep. Yeah, she was placed in a feeding trough. She placed the baby in a feeding trough. And there's the doctrine of the virgin birth. So that what was born was what John calls the one and only. Not the only begotten, because begotten means to give birth to. It literally in the Greek says the one and only, the unique. A human and a divine being. The one and only. And if it weren't for the angels not being able to contain themselves, no one would have noticed in all the hustle and bustle. You ever be in New York City? In the middle of Times Square? Talk about hustle and bustle. They closed it off to car traffic. You can sit. I sat there sometime. Kathy went into Macy's to shop. I'd had my fill of Macy's. And within a half hour to 45 minutes, I think any type, flavor, background of human passed by me. It was one of the most amazing places to be, to see the different kinds of humanity in the backgrounds. So I can imagine Bethlehem was like that at the time. And the shepherds were given a sign. You're going to go in, you're going to see a baby wrapped in cloths, laying in a feeding trough. That doesn't happen too often. It wouldn't be a sign if it was common. They probably checked in a bunch of barns before they finally found the one. What do we learn from the shepherds? The lowliest are usually the first to believe and come to faith. And their faith was not that they were told and they believed it. They went and checked it out. All right. Then, 8 days later, Jesus was presented in the temple. 2 old people. Come and greet them in the marketplace. Oh, yeah. The Spirit just sent me over to see you. We have no idea who you are. I've never seen you before. Yeah, and the child, he will be great someday. Simeon, though, you know what? Satan's going to pierce his heart, and your heart's going to be pierced too. Yeah, good news, right? No. Simeon and Anna. God keeps all of his promises. And then some wise men, or some places they call them wise guys. They come to visit the family and realize now the family is in a house. They didn't come to the manger. They followed a star from the east and they gave 3 gifts. That's why we think there were 3 wise men. No, they gave 3 gifts. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Okay? Money, medicines, and ointments. Perfect presents for a family just starting out. Yeah. And they probably could see the need and they had plenty with them, and so they shared it.
Went out 2 years later.
When they left, Herod didn't want a new king in his area. He asked where it was supposed to be born. The Jews said Bethlehem. He sent his guards, and he tried to find out from the wise men the time of year the star appeared, and he had the baby boys killed 2 years and younger. The soldiers carried out their orders, but they didn't stop to figure out if it was male or female. They killed any kid they saw. And sometimes they killed the parents with the kid who were trying to protect them. The blood, according to Josephus and other historians, the drains in the road just ran red with blood. And then Herod died, struck by God. The family had escaped to Egypt at the time. Jesus did not grow up in Egypt. He was only there for a month or 2 till Herod died. And they were afraid to go back because his brother Archelaus was there, who was even worse than Herod the Great was. Said, okay, you can go back home to Nazareth. And that's where he grew up. Again, Matthew says it was because he was prophesied he would be a Nazarene. He'd be from the territory of Galilee. Totally missed that one in their prophecies. Then Jesus did have other siblings. I know there are groups that can't stand that. But it says Mary and Joseph did not have sexual relations until after the child was born. Which means they did later on. There are groups that want Mary to be a perpetual virgin, thinking that the act of sex is actually a sin. And then we have the genealogies. Matthew traces the lineage from Joseph to David and then to Abraham to fulfill what was spoken by the prophets. He includes 4 women. That's the first time any of the scriptures ever included women. Sorry, ladies. But that shows you how he's even saying it's not secluded to just the guys, everyone. And these women are not women of good repute either. Tamar pretended to be a prostitute so that her father-in-law would have sexual relations with her. But he was supposed to give her off in marriage, and he didn't want to do that. She was a bad omen. Rahab from Jericho, a prostitute, but she was the one who by faith hid the spies. See, God will incorporate sinful people into his family because of their faith. Ruth was a Moabite. Those people were supposed to be excluded from the congregation. But they weren't 100%. Anybody who turns to God was forgiven. And then Matthew couldn't even bring himself to name Uriah's wife. That's Bathsheba. Through Solomon. In Luke, he traces his lineage through Heli, who is thought to have been Mary's father. This is the genealogy of Mary. It's a different list of names from Jesus back to David, but from David to Abraham, exactly the same. And then he doesn't stop there. He goes all the way back to Adam, and he doesn't even stop there. He goes all the way back to God. John doesn't even do a genealogy. he gives the identity of Jesus right from the start. That was God in the flesh. He was in the beginning with God. He was God. So, there's the birth stories. The birth was important to establish Jesus as Messiah, the fulfillment of all the scriptures. No one knew any of this till after the resurrection, when it finally, and this irritates a lot of people too, that's when finally Mary understood what was going on. And his brothers also became faithful. 2 of them are named as leaders in the early church. James, and then a guy who couldn't really go by his own name because of what happened, the crucifixion. So he shortened his name Jude instead of Judas. All right. So when you come to the Christmas season, this is what everybody's trying to depict. Jesus was God in the flesh. He was here as one of us who grew up living the perfect life that we are supposed to live. That's why he's the example for us all. That's what this season means. Get people to get to understand there, and now we can finish the story where he came to pay the price for our sin, raised from the dead so that we too could have eternal life. That is the purpose and the meaning of the season. All right. Next week we'll look at some things about Jesus' life and what he taught, what he did to prove himself as Messiah. All right.